In this speech, I will be explaining the full origin story of how I came to be a free software fan, and all things GNU+Linux and such. So, let's begin right from the start. I have always been interested in computers and computer stuff in general, from doing redstone things in Minecraft and attempting to build redstone computers that I would never finish, and watching all kinds of videos on YouTube about how computers work and everything. I've always been interested in computers, and then my first introduction to computer programming would have been the ComputerCraft mod for Minecraft. There are these computers that allow the user to program in the Lua programming language in the Minecraft world, and then do all kinds of things. So that's how I would have learned about computer programming. And so that's how I basically lived for a long time. I was interested in computers and I did all kinds of computer things. Now, I want to mention at this point, because this is a speech about software freedom and all that, that at this time, I always assumed that all software is untrustworthy by default. So, anytime I would install computer software, it would only be if I deemed it necessary or something that I wouldn't want to live without. So, the only software programs I ever installed on a computer were very few things, like a few games that I liked and whatever necessary software I needed to do the things I wanted to do. So, interestingly enough, this is actually the reason why back when I was making YouTube videos in the old days, I used the phone to record the screen for so long. It's because I didn't want to install any screen recorder software because I didn't trust them. Eventually I would install software, but because I deemed it necessary at that point, because, well, whatever. But like, the idea is that I didn't trust software. I was always distrustful of software. I wouldn't install it if it wasn't necessary. I would only ever use the default things on the operating system if available, and install whatever necessary stuff I needed on top of the operating system, but only the necessary things. And I would always, so basically the policy is that if I don't need it, I'm not gonna install it, and I would try to, and basically the only way I would in any way conceive of trusting something was just based on if it was popular, basically. Basically the idea was that if it's popular, then surely there are some people who have looked into it, if it's trustworthy or whatever. So, of course, I would never fully trust any software, but at least I would install software that was popular, because regardless of whether it was proprietary or anything, because I didn't know about such things back then, I would just install software if it was popular and I deemed it necessary. So that's interesting. But then let's continue with the story on other things. So let's see. I was programming a game engine in C++, and I was using the OpenGL graphics thing. And specifically I was using the GLFW and GLEW libraries in C++. And an interesting thing about that is that I was already aware back then about the concept of, quote, open source, unquote. I was aware of that for a long time because I was aware that those softwares were licensed under such licenses, and I was aware of the concept of software licenses in general, and I understood the fact that like software is licensed under terms and conditions of use, and those licenses permitted me to use them, so I could use them in my software. I understood that sort of a concept, but I didn't really think anything of it. I just saw it. Well, some people just want to contribute these things to society or whatever. They want to donate it to the people because, well, like, gotta make some graphics of API available to the people, so they just want to donate it to the people so that they can make their things. So I didn't really think anything of it. It was just, well, they just make that available so that people can use it. So I continued programming my game engine, and here a really interesting thing happened later. I came across a copyleft. With the idea of copyleft, I came across software that was licensed under a copyleft license. Free software, source code available and all that, but it was copyleft. So I figured that, well, this is really interesting. They want me to also make my source code available if I use the software, because of course I understood what the copyleft meant, because I was aware of licenses and the terms and all that. So I understood that, okay, well, these people want me to make my source code also available. Well, I wondered, well, okay, well, that's interesting. They want me to contribute the source code back to them, basically, because, well, if they make the source code available for me, they also want me to give the source code to them, because, like, they want that to be done. That's the way they want it. And I was like, okay, I can understand that. So I thought, anyway. And then I would just avoid copyleft software because, well, I figured that I would want to, of course, release my software as proprietary because, well, that's just the way people do things, right? So that's what I thought back then. So I would avoid copyleft licenses. So an interesting thing about this is that I was already aware about the ideas of, quote, open source, unquote, and copyleft and software licenses and everything. I was already aware of all of these things for a long time before I ever came to know about software freedom. So that's an interesting thing, interesting fact. These days I would still distrust software. Of course I wouldn't make the connection that software that was like source code available would be more trustworthy or anything. I didn't really think about it. Like it was just a way to make like a donation to society or whatever. You know, like, because I was also aware of like public domain, that you can make something public domain and it's like available to other people. I was already aware of many of these concepts for a long time. So I just didn't really think anything of it. It wasn't something I thought about really. So nothing really came of it. So I continued on looking into computer stuff and watching YouTube videos about computer software and all kinds of things because, well, I was still interested in such things at that time, so, and I still am, but anyway, at that time I was still interested in that, so I continued watching all these videos. And then it would happen. I came across the channel Mental Outlaw on YouTube, and he talked about how proprietary software is bad and useless and trash and bad software. This would happen around the same time that I realized that Microsoft is going to put out Windows 11. So I was, at the time I just looked up like Windows 11 and I realized that, oh no, Microsoft is going to put out another version of Windows, another new version of Windows, a bad Windows. I already disliked Windows, of course, because naturally I was already aware of many of these ideas. I already disliked Windows, well, actually, not for any idea reasons, but I still disliked Windows because it was just a bad operating system. Like, I was already aware that, like, it's a bad operating system and there are many things bad about it, like, it might be all kinds of spyware and whatever, maybe. I don't really remember, actually. I didn't really think about it much back then, in that sense. I just thought that it was difficult to use, like, it was clunky and generally just a bad operating system. I only thought about that. So it's actually quite interesting that for so long I was aware of all of these ideas, all kinds of concepts, but I never really did anything about it. I never looked up any other alternatives to any other operating systems. And curiously, I had actually installed Ubuntu before, but I didn't really think of anything of it either. So really, I had already used Ubuntu very briefly in a virtual machine. I was aware of, quote, open source, unquote. I was aware of software licenses and copyright and everything. Like, I was already aware of so many things, but I never came across software freedom. I never heard about the GNU philosophy or Richard Stallman or anything like that. I never heard anyone say free software or Libre software or anything like that. So for a long time I was aware of so many of these concepts, but there was never that fundamental concept of software freedom. So I realized that Windows 11 is going to come out, and I thought, what a disaster. I really don't like this at all. And then I started looking up videos about how Windows 11 is trash and whatever, and that might have been the reason why I came across mental auto. I don't remember actually. I don't remember. I didn't write this down back then. This would have happened now some maybe 2.5 years ago, at the time I'm recording this speech, so I actually don't remember anymore how that went specifically, but it was actually around really the same time. I discovered the mental outlaws. I might have just before discovered the mental outlaws and all, watched some other videos from there, some random nonsense, and actually I don't remember anymore which happened like first, but this I remember. It was me realizing that Windows 11 is like gonna come out, and I don't like this nonsense. Let's see like what people have to say about Windows 11. And I might have, this is probably how it went. I might have already been like aware of, I might have already seen some mental outlaw videos, but I didn't really think about anything of it. It was just another YouTuber or whatever, I didn't really care. So actually, that I might have seen that channel first, but not really paid any attention to it. But now I saw Mental Outlaw having made some videos about Windows 11 being bad or whatever nonsense like that, and then I went across watching more of his videos, and there were videos about like the Libre web browser and some free software stuff, talking about how free software is better, like more secure and such things. So he might have mentioned things about the source code. So finally, at this time, I would have started liking the idea of these free softwares. But I still didn't think of it as a matter of like right and wrong. Mental Outlaw talked about mainly like the practical advantages and how free software is more secure, and Microsoft is a proprietary trash spyware operating system and everything like that. So a lot of things that I would have already been aware of, and really just but that did give me something to look into, and I did. But I started using like the Libre web browser and all that because, well, proprietary software is bad. So actually, yeah, this would have been the first time I ever like made the connection that like proprietary software is like really bad and I should avoid. Yeah, this is where at last I could apply a framework to how I could determine what software to trust. Because, like I already mentioned previously, that I would always distrust software, and I would only ever install software that was necessary and was popular. So if it was popular and necessary for me, then I would install it basically. So I would only use the popularity as a reason alongside it being necessary, because, well, chances are that more popular software would be more trustworthy because more people use it. Surely there's someone who knows about computer security out there using it. So that was the reasoning. Of course, that's incorrect. I know better now, but that's what I was thinking about at the time. But now I finally could apply a framework to how to determine what software can be trusted and what software can't be trusted. Mental Outlaw said that proprietary software is bad because it doesn't make the source code available, so it can't be trusted and it's bad. It's spyware and it's malware and everything is bad and bad and bad, and Windows is bad and everything, it's all bad. And free software is better because it makes the source code available and it's more secure and such things. So I now really started looking into this stuff and I became interested. I started paying attention. Yeah, that's the important thing. That's the key thing. I started paying attention to it, and it became something I was interested in. So for the first time, I was now interested in the idea of these software licenses and whatever. But I still wasn't aware of like the ethics, the moral right and wrong, like such things. But fortunately, the Mental Outlaw videos, as I watched them, he kept mentioning this man, Richard Stallman. I was like, who is this guy then supposed to be? And I'm like, well, he Mental Outlaw keeps saying him, but like, well, okay, I'm gonna look him up. And I did. I looked up Richard Stallman and I watched on YouTube a couple interview type videos where some random people interviewed him. Yeah, and I started liking that stuff, and I watched some more Richard Stallman videos, and then some more, and even more, and then I kept watching some Richard Stallman videos, and finally, I understood it. Finally, the concept, I really understood it now. It's a matter of freedom, a matter of right and wrong. Proprietary software, it's not just bad and nonsense software, it's actually morally wrong, and software freedom is a matter of right and wrong. The software should be made free so that it respects the user's freedom and their community. Proprietary software denies the user the freedom to do with their computer what they want. Proprietary software is harmful to the user and their community. So now, only at this time, I thought about it for a while. I thought about the issue for a while, a long while, I guess, or whatever. I thought about it, and eventually I would conclude that, yes, indeed, I do agree. At first I didn't quite necessarily agree, because I was still under the impression that, like, proprietary software is just fine, whatever, because, well, that's, like, the way people just do things. You know, I was making software, and I was planning on releasing it as proprietary software, like the game engines and whatever I was working on. I would have released those as proprietary software for a long time. I thought about it, and I thought about various compromises that, well, maybe maybe source code could be made available, but does it need to be like, do the users need to have the right to distribute modified versions or whatever? I thought about all kinds of compromises, but as I kept listening to the Richard Stallman speeches, he convinced me more and more that, yes, indeed, the software has to be entirely free, because proprietary software is evil, it is unjust. So that's how I came to know about software freedom. So that's basically it. From there on, I would just be aware of the software freedom, and I would just agree with it. And eventually, I would have switched almost all of my software to be free software. Around that time, when I had already heard of Richard Stallman and thought about it for a while, I started switching. I started experimenting with GNU+Linux distros on virtual machines. Because, interestingly enough, I had already done such a thing in the past. I had already installed Ubuntu in a virtual machine, but I didn't think anything of it. I was already aware of, like, Ubuntu and, quote, Linux operating system, unquote. Of course, that's the incorrect term, and I know better now, but at the time I would have been aware of such things. So that's really interesting that nothing ever came of it, like, well, for a long time. Eventually something did come of it, but not for a long time. I would have been aware of all of these different things, but I just didn't think about it. And that's really bizarre, because, like, well, how does that even happen? But that really just shows that if you have a way of doing things, like the human brain probably just doesn't think about things in such ways, perhaps, because, well, how can it be explained that I was aware of software licenses, quote, open source, unquote, copyleft, Ubuntu, and the supposed, quote, Linux operating system, unquote. And I was aware of all that, but I didn't think anything of it. Software freedom was never brought up. So perhaps that's one big difference. For a long time, no one talked about software freedom. And also, this is one of the big reasons why I hold such disdain for the, quote, open source, unquote. I dislike it immensely. and I dislike people who talk about it, because I was aware of that term for so long. I even saw the GPL version 3 license, and I thought, well, this is just an open source license like the others, except it just requires me to make the source code available, so that they also can get the source code who made the software. They also want it to be made available. But I just thought that it was just just another open source license. That's what I would have thought. But the issue of freedom wasn't brought up, because, well, it had another term, quote, open source, unquote, was the term. If people called it Libre, then I would have looked up what the Libre means, because I didn't know what that term would mean, because it's not English. But I would have looked it up, perhaps. Now, this is speculation, but perhaps I could have looked it up and figured out that it means freedom, and the software has something to do with freedom, and perhaps I might have looked something like that up. That's speculation. I don't know how things would have happened. But anyway, people called it, quote, open source, unquote, and people talked about, well, not many really talk about it. I didn't really investigate it any further, but anyway, the point is that the issue of freedom wasn't brought up in the term, quote, open source, unquote, which I was aware of, and all that. So, I dislike it. I basically speak from personal experience that the, quote, open source, unquote, competes for mindshare with software freedom, because for a long time I didn't learn about free software and software freedom, despite being aware of so many of these different concepts. So, that's very unfortunate. But fortunately, eventually I did. I wonder how much of it might have just been luck, because I just happened to discover some mental outlaw channel on YouTube who mentioned Richard Stallman a couple of times. So what if Mental Outlaw didn't mention Richard Stallman? What about all the other YouTubers who never mentioned him? And such. And what about some YouTube algorithm who just decides not to recommend those videos? Yeah, a lot of it might have just been luck. I wonder if I would have eventually figured out and come across software freedom. I really do wonder how much of it would have just been luck. Or was I destined to eventually find it? I don't know. It is really interesting that I would have been aware of so many things for such a long time. It really does make me wonder, was I destined to find the GNU+Linux operating system and start using it, and software freedom and all those things? I do wonder, would I have found these things? Was I destined to become a user of GNU+Linux operating systems and be a fan of software freedom? Anyway, I would first, on the virtual machines, when I installed those GNU+Linux distros after Richard Stallman had told me that software freedom is a good thing. Pop! OS is the first distro I would have used. I actually discovered that distribution specifically. At the same time, just coincidentally, the Linus Tech Tips people were making those videos about the GNU+Linux stuff. They were making just those things about the gaming challenge. Things would have happened just about at the same time. Just started. I think those videos might have just been released around that time, and they basically just made the video on the Pop! OS. There was this, I think it was the Anthony guy who was guiding the installation of the Pop! OS. That sort of a thing. That's how I discovered the distribution Pop! OS, and that was the first distribution I used in the virtual machine for a while. And then I would have tried other distributions also, and then I would have found the Linux Mint distribution, and then after using some of these for a while, I installed Linux Mint on the laptop. On my laptop, I have a desktop computer that I'm using right now, the same computer, and there's the laptop. I installed on the laptop the Linux Mint, and then I would have experimented some more on virtual machines for some half a year, and then eventually, in that time, I would have basically studied enough of the software freedom and all the alternatives to all the programs I used and figured out that many of the programs I already used were free software, and I was already aware of many alternatives to proprietary software. By the time I eventually switched the main desktop computer to also running Linux Mint. In fact, actually, interestingly enough, I almost installed OpenSUSE Tumbleweed as the distribution of choice on the desktop. I was already opening the installer, but then I decided against it anyway, and I ended up installing Linux Mint. That was a better choice, but actually that was just luck, because there was some requirement for a proprietary Wi-Fi firmware thing, and I wasn't sure how to figure that out with the OpenSUSE installer. So then I decided to I will just go with Linux Mint. I already know how Linux Mint works, so I've already been using it on the laptop for like almost half a year or something by then. So but I'll just use Linux Mint. Why not? Linux Mint works just fine. I'm fine with that. And then I did end up making the correct choice. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed would have been a big mistake, but I wouldn't have known that at the time actually yet. But well, now I know that I made the correct choice, and that would have been a big mistake. Go with OpenSUSE. Yes, that would have been a big mistake, really big mistake, because rolling releases are not my thing at all. I don't like rolling releases, because personally for my use case, they just don't fulfill any purpose. It's not that I'm saying that like no one can like rolling releases or that they can't work for anyone, but for my use cases they don't work, so I don't like them, and it would have been a bad mistake if I had to constantly update every day. So many updates, I would have not liked that at all. I would have disliked the experience very much. So I'm really glad I ended up making the decision to use Linux Mint, even if by just coincidence, just luck, who knows. Whatever. I would have then installed free software on the computer, and I run almost exclusively free software. Not quite. There are a couple things that are proprietary. Currently on this system there is Minecraft, some proprietary Wii games that I run in an emulator, and whatever proprietary firmware is in the kernel, and some occasional JavaScript on websites. And that's about it. That's basically all the proprietary software I run now. And I don't play Minecraft that often. I play Minecraft very occasionally. It's installed on the computer and I play it sometimes, but like not that often. So that's one of the biggest. And also same goes for those other games. Wii games. Nintendo Wii games. I run them on the Dolphin emulator, which is free software, the emulator. Those games are of course proprietary, but they're running the emulator, so it's not really much of a security risk at that point if such things concern me. So basically, any harmful effect beyond just the ethical effects of those proprietary softwares, the practical things like spyware and whatever, those issues are neutralized because they're running the emulator, those Wii games. And JavaScript on the websites, well, whatever. Even that I have multiple user accounts on the computer. On the primary user account I use most of the time, I use the Libre.js extension in the Firefox web browser that actually blocks all the proprietary JavaScript. It allows free software JavaScript to run. It blocks all the proprietary software. So actually I don't use proprietary JavaScript either, for the most part, on this user account. On the other user accounts I do have all the JavaScript enabled. That's where I go to YouTube to upload YouTube videos and whatever other stuff I might sometimes do in the web. Yeah. And yes, of course I use also virtual machines. Whenever I go to websites, if I can't, if I don't have to use the web browser on the other user account where I sign into YouTube, if I don't have to use that for whatever reason, which is for most other things, I always use a virtual machine. So anytime I'm going to some websites, some random websites, I would do that in a virtual machine because I don't want to run proprietary JavaScript on my host operating system. There is still the ethical issue in running proprietary software. It's still proprietary software and it denies freedom. But at least that can mitigate any harmful practical things that the software might do. If there is some proprietary JavaScript that has some malware or spyware or whatever, if I run it in a virtual machine, and particularly I run them in live environments. So because GNU+Linux distros, they fortunately have these live environments, oftentimes these desktop environments, that can be run live from the disk image. So I can run them on the virtual machine in the live environment and then go to the internet on the web browsers. And then I will run any proprietary software there. So anytime I have to go to some random website, I'll just go there in a virtual machine. So yeah, I don't like running so much proprietary software on my host operating system. If I have to run those proprietary JavaScripts, I'll prefer doing them in the virtual machine. So that's about the only proprietary software I use anymore. The occasional Minecraft, very rarely some Wii games on the emulator, and JavaScript in the virtual machines. Some proprietary JavaScript website things. And also sometimes on the host operating system also when I need to sign into like YouTube to upload videos or whatever. That I still do. And firmware in the kernel. But on some level I'm fine with, like, personally, I will tolerate. Yeah, I'm not really fine with it, but I'm willing to tolerate the firmware on the kernel because whatever. If the firmware was already on the device, then it might as well be a part of the hardware. So because the kernel just loads the firmware in there, whatever, I'll tolerate the use of that myself. But I can see why someone might not want to do that, and it's still a bad thing to include in distributions of operating systems because, well, here's the difference. If the firmware is already on the device, then it's on the device. But if the firmware has to be loaded by the kernel, then now there is proprietary software in the kernel. And if you put that on a GNU+Linux distribution, and you distribute the GNU+Linux distro with proprietary software in the kernel, well, you are distributing proprietary software now, and the distribution of proprietary software isn't cool. You are not supposed to publish operating systems with proprietary software on them. So that's why I'm against still making distributions that have proprietary software in the kernel. I demand GNU+Linux distros at least make a fully free version available, if nothing else. If not by default, then at least make that optional. Only free software. Absolutely free. 100% free. No firmware. Because if the user wants to install such firmware, they can do that manually after the fact. Yeah. Or at least there should be like the option. If someone wants to install the free software, so if someone wants to install the proprietary firmware, they can download a different ISO. And if someone wants to install free software only, they can download that ISO. So yeah, whatever. But I'm still personally willing to tolerate running the proprietary firmware on this machine. But that's just my own use case. So basically, I would then download a fully free operating system and then manually install proprietary firmware there myself. So that's the way I would do it then. Anyway, not really all that much proprietary software, and that's pretty good. So, then, in conclusion, what have I sacrificed for freedom, and is there anything really bad, something that would have prevented me from switching? Well, not much. One game I did sacrifice, and that really it still kind of hurts me. I still sometimes just think of it like, oof, yeah, that's Cities Skylines. I had to sacrifice that. Cities Skylines is a game I liked. I really liked that game. It still kind of hurts. I did sacrifice one game. Cities Skylines I did sacrifice. That's unfortunate. One thing I sacrificed. But that's almost all of it. Nothing else really. Like I said, I already didn't install that much proprietary software to begin with, because I would always avoid installing software because I distrusted all software by default. A few games, well, I didn't really play much games before switching to GNU+Linux anyway, so what, a few Wii games on the emulator, ugh, who cares? But like, City Skylines I did sacrifice. I actually for a long time I didn't even play Minecraft at all. I actually did drop that for a long time too. So when I said that I now have Minecraft on the system, for a long time I didn't. At least like half a year I went without even having it installed. Maybe longer, I don't remember anymore. I didn't really write that down, how long I did that, who cares. For a long time I didn't even have Minecraft installed on the system, so actually there was very little proprietary software back then. Now I have Minecraft, so that's one more proprietary software, but still whatever. But oh yeah, I was running a proprietary driver back then. A Wi-Fi driver. Yes, the Wi-Fi driver, the very Wi-Fi driver I mentioned with the OpenSUSE installation that I didn't do. The very Wi-Fi driver, I was running that for a long time. So there was for a long time a proprietary Wi-Fi driver running, and that was an actual driver actually. Actually, I don't know, maybe it wasn't a firmware. Yeah, that wasn't a firmware, that was a driver. So that was a driver. So when I talked about OpenSUSE installation, that was a driver, that was a Wi-Fi driver. I might have mistakenly called it a firmware, I don't remember anymore. But it was a driver, a proprietary driver, and that I had running for a long time. But since then I have eradicated that. I now have a wire, an Ethernet cable that connects to the computer, so I don't use Wi-Fi drivers anymore. I just removed it, so I don't have that running anymore. Yeah, and I installed Minecraft in its place. Anyway, but one game I did sacrifice. I guess I could just install it, but I just don't want to. Because software freedom. Software freedom. My views on software freedom. I want to have software freedom. So I refuse to install City Skylines. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. No matter how much I miss the game, and I would like to play some City Skylines, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to install proprietary software. It would require me to install some proprietary, absolutely proprietary trash Steam, and then install some absolutely proprietary video game on it. Nah, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not installing some trash Steam. No fucking way, no. I'm not putting some crap Steam on my system, no. I'm not going to tolerate that. I refuse. That is absolutely proprietary. And essentially, since like these games, they always come with these DRMs and whatever, like Valve does crap, and like I'm not even going to touch that. No, I'm not even going near that stuff. I don't want to have anything to do with that. As much as I miss the game, it's proprietary trash, and I'm not going to play it. That's unfortunate. That's the only thing I sacrificed. For the most part, really, I didn't really sacrifice much at all, really. Well, for a while I didn't play Minecraft, but then I just installed it back anyway, so whatever, but I don't play it that often. Whatever. But yeah, not really much. So is there a reason that other people couldn't install GNU+Linux? Well, not really much reason, like I'm sure some people have some very specific software that they require, but that's only a few people. Most people could just switch to the GNU+Linux distro. Some GNU+Linux distro, yeah. Not much needs to be sacrificed. Yeah, well, that's the end of this piece.